This is what happens when rewilding goes wrong. Oostvaardersplassen in the Netherlands was an attempt to recreate an ancient environment inside a fenced area. It failed to include large predators. As a result, the herbivores there starved to death. To some people, rewilding means no wildlife management. And there's an example of it here in the UK. I'm standing near to the League Against Cruel Sports Sanctuary at Baronsdown in the West Country. And it's an example of mismanagement based on an animal rights doctrine. Basically, Baronsdown is a wildlife experiment, and it has results. And some of the people who have to live with that are its neighbours. Here's one of them, Guy Thomas-Everard.
Well, my family have been farming here since the mid-60s, and I've been farming here for about 30 years now. They are independent, I suppose, of you, in a sense, in that I meet regularly with all my other neighbours and discuss everything from what deer are about to the price of lambs. But the League, there is no interaction with them.
They wouldn't, for example, be part of a deer management group?
No. We get no reports from the League about what numbers of deer they've got or anything of that sort, or what health issues they might have in the deer. We don't. We'd like to know, but we don't get any of that information from them.
Wildlife management is a touchy subject. Although it may not be a commonly used phrase, in practice the management of wildlife happens all the time, from controlling mice in your kitchen to protection of crops. More recently, certain groups advocating an animal rights view say that no management at all is required. They say it can all be left to nature. After all, they argue, she has been doing it for a lot longer than humans. Sort of makes sense, doesn't it? But there is a major flaw in that argument. It's us, humans. Over thousands of years, humans have had an enormous effect on the environment. While there are still areas of the world that can rightly be termed a wilderness, in the UK there is virtually no such place. We have removed some large predators, so in effect we have upset that natural balance to the point where we have to manage habitats if we want to see healthy, diverse wildlife.
Normally we used to expect the hunt to look after the population of deer, and the very valuable function which they did was to come and scatter deer and limit the amount of damage that deer are doing, and people kind of underestimate how much damage deer do. When the League began to find that they needed to feed the animals to keep them in the sanctuaries, then it became a little bit more problematical because vast numbers, large numbers of deer were actually going into the sanctuaries and staying there, and then you were getting health problems.
About 10 years ago, there was an issue here with lots of deer being found dead or dying for various reasons. Some of them had bovine tuberculosis, some of them were just chronically thin from worm infestations and lack of nutrition. And that stemmed from the cessation of the management practice that they had, which was to feed deer hay and artificial feed or concentrates like we'd feed our sheep. I think that's probably causing them a problem because the concentration was causing a disease issue, so they stopped that, and as a consequence things got worse before they got better, if you like, because those deer that were relying on the supplementary feed suddenly weren't getting it, and so they were dying, and then the numbers dropped.
These are the deer in a London park. Imagine what would happen if they weren't controlled.
Well, unfortunately, any animal, as soon as you increase the concentration of that animal, as soon as you increase the stocking density, to use an agricultural word, then clearly you're going to get health problems.
They started to use something called Panacure, which is a dewormer. What's the problem with using that in a wild population?
Well, most extraordinary. I mean, they wrote to me, I suppose, in my capacity as chairman of this organisation, to say we're using this product and to let you know that it's not safe to eat if you should happen to shoot or want to be caught hunting. And I couldn't understand how anybody could do that, because you have legal withdrawal periods before you're allowed to allow something to be slaughtered. So unless an animal is being restrained and kept within, shall we say, a farm, you cannot be certain that you are fulfilling the legal requirement if you're treating something like that with a veterinary product.
Sickly deer have been known to come off Baronsdown, and in this case, locals took the matter into their own hands. This man is killing a sick deer by the side of the road. Feelings do run high. Here's a piece of footage of local people shouting at a League Against Cruel Sports employee.
Is that right? You, up here, have got the most diseased population of deer on Exmoor.
This footage shows a League deer manager at work. Clearly, at some stage, the League changed its mind about culling deer on Baronsdown, but no one knows what that policy is. It has not been made public. Today, 10 years later, the deer do not appear to be in such high concentrated numbers, but some animal rights groups are saying that wildlife management is not needed.
If they were allowed to disperse over a wide area, then it's highly likely that what they call the reproductive rate, the R0, of the disease would fall below before 1, and then the disease would naturally die out.
The National Trust culls deer on its land. The RSPB culls foxes, deer and other animals too. And the wildlife trusts advocate culling grey squirrels in order to protect its cousin, the red squirrel. When animal rights groups such as PETA and Animal Aid say wildlife does not need to be managed, what they are really saying is that there is no need to protect farmers' crops or livestock, that disease should be allowed to spread, and that vulnerable species should be allowed to become extinct. When certain forms of management that lean towards an animal rights philosophy are proposed, there is very little evidence to show how these views can be tested, apart from Baronsdown.
There are no natural predators for deer, so if deer numbers weren't controlled, the numbers are going up and up until the only limiting factor is food, which is pretty much what happened at Baronsdown. And that means that things will die from starvation and from general weakness, and numbers will drop through rather cruel circumstances, I suppose, really. So for that reason, numbers have got to be maintained. And the other aspect is everything is in a bit of a balance, that deer range freely across Exmoor, which is mainly farmland. If you let the numbers escalate too much, then the goodwill and the tolerance that farmers have for those deer is going to diminish, because the numbers are so great that they're having an effect on their crops and their grass, which they're trying to keep for their livestock to make a living.
Wildlife management is the key to many controversial wildlife issues. The Countryside Alliance is taking the lead here by producing this document, which contains so much good sense. It outlines the need for wildlife management, it outlines the problems that the lack of wildlife management causes, and importantly, it points the way forward.